Regretting reporting harassment. My aunt owns a boutique specializing in clothing for South Asian women, and my entire family, including myself, has relied on her for our attire for special occasions for many years. She established her business approximately 15 to 20 years ago, and we have become quite familiar with the other employees since then. One of the tailors at her boutique is her right-hand man and serves as the second in command after her. Generally, whenever I need clothing made, he takes my measurements and discusses the specifics with me, usually accompanied by my mom, aunt, or another relative, as we often have our outfits created together. I have always felt at ease in this setting because, naturally, I am not alone, and I have known him since I was quite young, probably around 12 or 13 years old. About 3 years ago, my cousin was getting married, and since South Asian weddings can span several days to weeks with numerous events, my relatives and I frequently visited my aunt's boutique during that period to prepare our outfits. It is worth noting that at this time, my aunt's business was just beginning to expand. She had hired a few new employees and started receiving more orders, yet prior to this period, she had faced challenges for a couple of years. I was around 17 or 18 then, and went to the boutique with my aunt to discuss my garments for the wedding with her tailor. She needed to meet some customers in her office next door, so I decided to enter her tailor's room alone to discuss the design, figuring he would already have my measurements since he had made many of my clothes previously. The doors to every room were open, and people were moving about, which made me feel quite comfortable, as it typically did when I was there. I introduced myself to the tailor and explained my intentions. He then asked me to step further into the room, suggesting it wouldn't look appropriate for the other workers outside to see me getting measured. It is important to note that the other employees outside this room were young to middle-aged men, and the tailor himself was also middle-aged. I assumed he was saying this due to his conservative background, so I complied. He guided me to the side where I couldn't see outside and no one could observe me from the door, then proceeded to grope me under the guise of taking measurements. The entire time, I felt frozen, convincing myself that he must be legitimately measuring me and attempting to ignore my instincts. He then began looking at fabric and asked how I wanted the neckline and chest designed. As that detail was crucial, this was the main focus. Throughout this time, he held his phone angled toward me, and when I remained silent and just stared at his phone, he claimed he was taking pictures of the fabric with the measurements annotated on it for future reference. I rushed through my design conversation and quickly left. I kept reflecting on the instinctive unease I felt throughout the encounter. Even though I tried to dismiss it, it persisted in bothering me, so after a few days, I confided in my cousin, my aunt's daughter, about how the tailor measured her. She sensed something was off immediately and advised that I should speak to her mother. I hesitated because I was aware of how hard my aunt had been working and the fact that her business was only just beginning to flourish. Additionally, I spent all this time convincing myself that I might have misinterpreted the situation. I didn't feel I could approach her and demand she terminate her tailor's employment based solely on my word. There was no evidence. After contemplating it for a few more days and speaking to my cousin again, we agreed to address it with my aunt together. I chose not to involve my mom. I understood how protective she could be, and I didn't want her to get upset and direct her anger toward my aunt or instigate a major conflict. I explained to my aunt what had occurred, feeling incredibly anxious about the potential repercussions this could have on her business. Therefore, I attempted to minimize my emotions. I mentioned that I would keep this from my mom. My aunt acknowledged that what had occurred was inappropriate, and my cousins supported me by stating that this was not an acceptable method of measuring anyone, adding that the tailor had never treated her or anyone else inappropriately. My aunt then assured me that she would provide him with better training and that from that point forward, she would measure all female clients herself and would always be present during consultations. Lastly, she asked me not to inform my mom. I recognized that I had minimized my feelings for her benefit and didn't press her to stand up for me or confront her tailor or terminate his employment. I felt conflicted and reluctant because of my concern for her business and the possibility of this situation escalating and involving the entire family if it were to become known. I understood all of that, yet I still felt hurt and disappointed by her reaction. My aunt and I have shared a close bond since my birth, She is also close to my parents and was my and my mother's greatest support after my father's passing. I owe her so much for everything she has done for me and my family, which is why I hesitated to raise this issue, knowing it could negatively impact her work. Following our conversation, I convinced myself that it was fine. She promised to address the matter, and it wasn't as though I needed any new clothing made in the near future. At least she still had all her employees, and her business was continuing to thrive. A few months later, her tailor resigned. He found a better-paying position, and it seems he and my aunt had a disagreement. My aunt recruited a new team, and her business is flourishing more than ever now. It has been about 3 years since this incident, and my aunt and I remain very close and on excellent terms. Recently, I began therapy to address some instances of sexual harassment that occurred after this incident. My therapist inquired about any past experiences, and I suddenly remembered this one. It felt as though I had completely erased it from my mind since then. I thought I would be all right recounting it, but when my therapist asked what happened after I told my aunt, I felt so embarrassed. I couldn't bring myself to disclose how my aunt reacted because I didn't want to delve into my emotions about that, so I fabricated a story and told her that my aunt had terminated the tailor immediately. Discussing the rest of the situation was quite challenging. Somehow, lying and reconstructing the account didn't make it any easier. As soon as our session concluded, I regretted not being honest, and since then, I have been contemplating whether I should share the truth with my mom. Over the past few days, I have nearly tried to tell her but backed out each time out of fear of her reaction. Moreover, what is the point of bringing this up and possibly creating a significant issue 3 years later, especially when the tailor is no longer employed by my aunt? I am torn between revealing the truth to my therapist during our next session or attempting to move past it on my own once again. Neither option appears straightforward, but discussing it with my mom or confronting my aunt could potentially strain multiple family relationships, and I am uncertain if I can bear the guilt of being responsible if things were to escalate. Story 2. I, 31NB, just asked for a break from my boyfriend, 31M, after 1.5 years of dating. Would I be unreasonable to break up with him primarily because of sex? He, 31M, and I, 31NB, a fab, connected online 2 years ago and began dating after approximately 6 months of communication. While we are not in a long-distance relationship, we typically have one significant date each month, along with occasional smaller casual dates during the week since we both work from home. I consider myself extremely low maintenance, which is why I genuinely appreciate this style of dating. I identify as asexual because I do not feel sexual attraction, but I am not averse to sex. I lost my virginity to him after 6 months of dating, and I have made an effort to explore my sexuality with him, though I needed to take things slowly, for which I am very thankful for his patience. However, there are several aspects that make me uneasy. It feels like we can never simply cuddle. Every time, he ends up asking for oral sex or intercourse, even if we only have a few minutes together before we need to leave. He anticipates nudes from me every day unless I am ill or busy. I have autoimmune issues, so there are times when I am in pain and unable to use my hands effectively. If I forget to send them for a day or two, he insists I send additional photos to catch up. To clarify, I have never felt entirely comfortable with the idea of sending nudes, but he has convinced me that it is his way of being connected to me daily, despite the fact that we talk on the phone 3 to 5 times every weekday and usually 3 times on weekends. He treats me to extravagant gifts and buys me meals during the week, but he prohibits me from spending any money on him or on our relationship outside of lingerie and lubricant. Even after a year and a half of dating, his friends and family do not know about our relationship. I struggle to reconcile this with the knowledge that his friends seem unbearable, but the fact that he never tells his family makes me feel like I am just an item to be collected once he has me. I remain hidden away in the packaging out of sight from everyone. Regarding his friends, I have requested that he drink less when he is with them, specifically limiting himself to a few drinks, as I am making an effort not to be controlling. However, he always finds an excuse to drink more than that limit, and he occasionally resorts to using illicit substances to manage the effects of excessive drinking. Nevertheless, he rarely goes out with his friends, perhaps once a month at most, which leads me to feel I might be overreacting. And to be clear, I want him to enjoy himself and spend time with his friends freely. I invited him to meet my parents when they visit later this year, and although he did not outright refuse, he responded with a very reluctant yes, unless something comes up, which I had to emphasize was very important to me. I suspect he consumes too much pornography and is trying to imitate it. He often tries to choke me lightly or spank me and desires for me to call him daddy, which is not something I am comfortable with at all. I had to nearly beg him not to purchase a paddle because the thought is traumatic for me. I understand that relationships require compromise, so I have attempted to call him daddy at the very least, but it always feels unsettling to me. Penetrative sex is uncomfortable for me. I understand this is quite common among people with vaginas, but every time it occurs, I experience pain, regardless of whether or not he has brought me to orgasm beforehand. His response when I express that it is unpleasant for me is to suggest that I should use a dildo to practice. When I propose that we could buy him a fleshlight for me to use on him, he reacts with mild disgust and claims he is not comfortable putting his penis into a silicone toy. On a related note, part of my autoimmune treatment involves medication that prevents me from carrying a viable pregnancy, and I strongly dislike children, with no interest in having any. I am on birth control, but my doctors remind me at every appointment that I must also use condoms to ensure maximum safety from pregnancy. However, he refuses to use condoms, citing the classic complaint that then he cannot feel anything. I have resorted to cycle tracking as my backup method, but whenever my fertile week coincides with a date, I feel pressured into having sex, which makes me feel guilty when I refuse. To clarify, he views only penetrative sex as real sex. In his perspective, mutual masturbation or manual stimulation does not count. However, in my mind, anything involving the genitals qualifies as sex. He makes jokes that make me uncomfortable, often mentioning finding another woman to satisfy him sexually or teasing me about making my breasts larger, despite my existing body image issues that verge on body dysphoria from having a 30 ff size. I understand that not every joke lands, and that is acceptable, but these comments are frequent. I do find him physically attractive. He maintains a clean appearance and dresses simply but well. When he makes an effort to impress me, he can be extremely romantic and showers me with praise and attention. However, if he becomes forgetful or complacent, he reverts to his old habits. I feel like he loves me primarily for my body and the fantasy of dating someone he finds as attractive as he claims. I worry that I may never find anyone who respects my time and shares a dating style that aligns with my lifestyle. I fear that I will not experience romantic love from anyone else, as he is my first boyfriend since my teenage years. I often find myself searching for reasons to end the relationship, wondering if things have truly been that bad. I have identified as asexual since before this relationship began, so my dissatisfaction and discomfort with sexual activities do not come as a surprise to me. I could have anticipated this. I am concerned that no one else will be willing to acknowledge my appearance as attractive when I dress more masculinely. I apologize for the disorganized nature of this writing. I am composing this while unable to sleep due to a migraine, desperately seeking some external perspective. I have tried communicating my comfort levels to him, and things would be fine for some time before he inadvertently adopts a new habit that troubles me. I should clarify that I appreciate the pseudo-long-distance dating style because I enjoy being busy at all times. I have countless hobbies that I love immersing myself in, taking up my free time. Additionally, my life is well established as it is. I reside in a home I adore with my 2 best friends as roommates and our 2 cats. I have no desire to cohabitate with anyone or rush into a relationship for any superficial social perks. I have been extremely clear that I do not want to change anything about my life currently, as I have worked hard to reach this point. So, Reddit, should I end this relationship or make another attempt with the significant stipulation that we need to reassess our sexual life? Story 3. Fiancé left me due to my cancer diagnosis. I left her destitute. This occurred 4 years ago, so the pain has diminished and my revenge has been fulfilled. I apologize if this is not the appropriate forum for this discussion. We were in a relationship for 4 years, which I believed to be wonderful. Both of us were established professionals with homes in the same neighborhood, and we each had daughters living with us. Her daughter was 11, while mine was 16 when we first met. We had intended to marry, build a house, and raise our daughters together. The house plans were in response to her recent diagnosis of a neurological disease that would ultimately require her to use a wheelchair, necessitating an aita-compliant home. During the planning phase, I undertook various landscaping and construction projects on her property to enhance its resale value. In total, I invested approximately 30,000 United States dollars into her home, processing everything through my side construction business for tax, permitting, and resale reasons. We had an agreement that payment would be made upon the sale of the house. I generated invoices for every project, but I never pressed for payment due to our prior arrangement. Fast forward 6 months, we were looking at properties to develop and finalizing the drawings for the new home when I began to feel unwell. I was unable to eat, frequently vomiting and passing blood. I noticed that my abdomen appeared swollen, which was unusual since we both prioritized healthy eating and exercised daily. Consequently, I visited the doctor and began undergoing tests. During this period, she started experiencing minor cognitive problems, and the stress from her job was worsening her condition, prompting her to accept a $20,000 per year pay cut in exchange for a less demanding position within her company. After a month of various tests and a biopsy, I received the diagnosis of a golf ball-sized tumor in my stomach and was advised to start chemotherapy. As expected, the chemotherapy and radiation treatments made me extremely ill. She began spending weekends assisting me and frequently stayed over, often to the point where both of them were at my home more than at theirs. At this juncture, I proposed that we list one of our houses for sale and move in together until the new home was completed. I had excellent supplemental insurance along with a long-term illness plan, which, combined with the sale of one of our houses, would provide us with financial stability and alleviate her financial concerns. Shortly after this conversation, however, she became increasingly distant. Her daughter stopped visiting mine, and she began making excuses to avoid spending time together. She ceased driving me to treatment sessions and stopped staying over at my place. Then she delivered a shocking statement, a sentence that will forever remain etched in my memory. "I love you, but I cannot envision myself caring for someone this sick in the long term, and I believe we should end our relationship." In a text, it shattered me. I will not pretend otherwise. This was the first woman I truly opened up to and envisioned a future with since my wife passed away when my children were 1 and 3 years old. Nevertheless, I tried to respond maturely. I forced myself to comprehend her perspective and accept the things I could not alter. The following day, I calmly gathered all of her belongings, packed them neatly, loaded them into my truck, and dropped them off on her porch while she was at work to avoid any awkward interactions. As I walked around the back and stood beneath the porch cover, I placed a box down, and there, in her living room, I witnessed her on the couch engaged in sexual activity with a man she had described to me as a lifelong friend. I had dined and socialized with this man and his girlfriend, and we had even gone on vacation together. I never brought up the incident with her and simply sent a text later, stating that I would leave her things on my side porch for her to retrieve whenever it was convenient for her. About 8 or 9 months later, I discovered from his now ex-girlfriend that they had separated because he admitted to having been intimate with my significant other, dating back to around the time we were completing the drawings for our new home. Now I was furious. It was time for revenge. At this point, I had completed my chemotherapy and radiation for the time being and was feeling healthier. While going through some neglected paperwork, I stumbled upon a file containing over $32,680 worth of unpaid, long overdue invoices, which I promptly forwarded to my attorney to initiate lien proceedings on her home. It turned out that I could not have done this at a better time, as she was about to list her house for sale. When adding interest accrued over what was then 19 months overdue, the invoices amounted to a considerable sum. That, along with the agreement to settle upon the sale of the house and attorney fees, left her with approximately $10,000 after the home sale and settling her existing mortgage. she had to withdraw from purchasing another home and eventually moved in with her oldest daughter, son-in-law, and 2 grandchildren. Additionally, she had to leave her job and begin receiving disability benefits. I encountered her a little over a year ago, and she appeared to have aged dramatically, using the wheelchair we had discussed. We exchanged polite but brief pleasantries before I excused myself and continued with my day. A few days later, her younger daughter contacted me to mention my encounter with her mother and asked if we could spend time together. I provided a vague response, thanked her for the call, and went on with my day. About a week later, my ex called and began apologizing for leaving me as she did. Our conversation was cordial but brief. I thanked her for reaching out and ended the call. She started texting me, and this continued for several weeks until she eventually inquired whether I could envision us rekindling our relationship. To this, I replied, "I cannot see myself caring for someone so ill in the long term. Do you remember the box on your back porch? Did you think that lifelong friend brought it over from my house? Good luck to you. Goodbye." Summary: my girlfriend ended our relationship because I was diagnosed with cancer. Consequently, I sabotaged the sale of her home, the purchase of another, and forced her to move in with her daughter. I then returned her breakup line back to her. I occasionally experience some guilt over this, but not much, and not frequently.